The wind howled like a wild animal as Ethan Carter gripped the steering wheel tightly. His old pickup truck groaned against the icy gusts battering it from all sides. Outside, the world was a swirling mess of white. Snowflakes danced chaotically in the air, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The road beneath him felt slippery and unpredictable, each turn requiring extra care. It wasn't supposed to be this bad when he left work earlier that evening. Weather reports had warned of snow, but nothing close to what he faced now. Ethan worked at a small repair shop on the outskirts of town. Fixing cars and appliances didn't pay much, but it kept him afloat. He lived alone in a modest apartment, scraping by month after month. Life hadn't been kind to him lately. His hours at the shop had been cut due to slow business, and his landlord had hinted about raising the rent again. Still, Ethan prided himself on being practical and resilient. Tonight, though, even his patience was wearing thin. He squinted through the windshield, wiping away condensation with the sleeve of his jacket. The defroster sputtered weakly, doing little to clear the fog. Leaning forward slightly, Ethan tried to focus on the road ahead. Headlights reflected off the falling snow, creating fleeting streaks of light that made it hard to tell where the pavement ended and the ditch began. Every so often he passed abandoned vehicles pulled over onto the shoulder, their drivers unwilling or unable to risk continuing in such conditions. Just as Ethan started to think about pulling over himself, something caught his eye, a dark shape moving near the edge of the road. At first he thought it might be an animal, perhaps a deer startled by the storm. But as he slowed down, he realized it was a person. A woman stood beside a car half buried in a snowbank, her arms wrapped tightly around herself for warmth. She wore a heavy coat and boots, but the biting cold seemed relentless. Her head was bowed and she appeared to be struggling to push the vehicle out of the ditch. Ethan hesitated for only a moment before pulling over. The road was deserted, and whoever this woman was, she clearly needed help. He parked his truck a safe distance behind her stranded car and turned on his hazard lights. Grabbing a flashlight from the glove compartment, he stepped out into the storm. The cold hit him like a wall, stealing his breath and stinging his cheeks. Pulling his own coat tighter around him, Ethan trudged through the knee-deep snow toward the woman. "Are you okay?" he called out, his voice muffled by the wind. The woman looked up, startled. Her face was pale, her lips tinged blue from the cold. Despite her obvious discomfort, there was a calmness in her expression, a quiet strength that surprised Ethan. She nodded quickly, brushing strands of damp hair away from her face. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady despite the shivers running through her body. "My car got stuck and I can't get it out." Ethan glanced at the car. It was a sleek sedan, not the kind of vehicle built for rough winter roads. One of its tires was buried deep in the snow and the front bumper was crumpled slightly, likely from sliding into the ditch. He doubted it would start anytime soon, let alone drive out without assistance. Turning back to the woman, he asked, "Do you have a phone? Can you call someone for help?" She shook her head. "No signal," she replied. "I've been trying since I got stuck, but nothing's coming through." Ethan frowned. They were miles away from the nearest town, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. Leaving her here wasn't an option, it was too dangerous. After a brief pause, he said, "Come on, get in my truck. I'll take you somewhere safe." For a moment, the woman hesitated. There was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, as if she wasn't sure whether to trust him. But then she nodded again, wrapping her scarf more securely around her neck. Together, they waded through the snow back to Ethan's truck. He opened the passenger door for her, helping her climb inside before hurrying around to the driver's side. Once settled, Ethan cranked up the heat and turned to study his unexpected passenger. Up close, she looked younger than he'd initially thought, mid-30s maybe. Her features were sharp yet elegant, framed by dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. Despite the cold, there was a certain poise about her, a quiet confidence that set her apart. "I'm Ethan, by the way," he said, offering a small smile. "Claire," she replied, her tone soft but firm. "Thank you for stopping." "Most people wouldn't have bothered." Ethan shrugged. "Couldn't just leave you out there, not in this weather." Claire gave him a faint smile, though her gaze remained distant, as if lost in thought. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the hum of the heater and the relentless roar of the storm outside. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "You live around here?" "Not far," Ethan answered. "Born and raised in these parts. You?" "No," she said, simply. "Just passing through." Her response was vague, almost evasive, but Ethan didn't press. People had their reasons for keeping things private, especially strangers met under unusual circumstances. Instead, he focused on navigating the treacherous roads. Each mile felt longer than the last, the storm showing no mercy. Occasionally, Claire would glance out the window, her brow furrowed as if calculating something silently. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the outskirts of a small town. The streets were eerily quiet, most residents having sought refuge indoors. Ethan spotted a modest motel tucked between two closed shops. Pulling into the parking lot, he turned to Claire. "This should do for tonight. It's not fancy, but it's warm and dry." Claire nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Ethan. Really, I mean it." "No problem," he said, waving off her gratitude. As she gathered her belongings, he added, "If you need anything else, food, directions, whatever, just let me know." She smiled softly, her eyes meeting his for the first time with genuine warmth. "You're a good man, Ethan. Don't forget that." With that, she stepped out of the truck, disappearing into the motel lobby. Ethan watched her go, feeling a strange mix of relief and curiosity. Something about Claire lingered in his mind, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Shaking his head, he started the engine and headed home, eager to escape the unforgiving storm. Little did he know this chance encounter would change his life forever. The snowstorm had finally eased by morning, leaving behind a thick blanket of white that covered the town like frosting on a cake. Ethan woke up to the quiet stillness that always followed a heavy snowfall. He brewed himself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the sunlight reflect off the icy landscape. His thoughts drifted back to the previous night, the woman he'd helped, Claire, and the strange sense of calm she carried despite her predicament. There was something about her that stuck in his mind, though he couldn't quite figure out what it was. After finishing his coffee, Ethan got ready for work. The repair shop wasn't far from his apartment, but the roads were slick with slush, so he drove carefully. As he pulled into the parking lot, he noticed an unfamiliar card sticking out of his wallet. It was Claire's business card, the one she had handed him before they parted ways. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now curiosity got the better of him. Flipping the card over, he read the details. Claire Bennett, CEO, Bennett Energy Solutions. Beneath her name was a phone number and an email address. Ethan frowned. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. Deciding to look her up later, he shoved the card back into his wallet and headed inside. The day passed slowly, filled with routine tasks, fixing a broken toaster, replacing a car battery, and helping a customer troubleshoot an old heater. By the time he finished, it was late afternoon, and the sun was beginning to set. On his way home, Ethan stopped at a gas station to fill up his truck. While waiting, he remembered Claire's card again. Pulling out his phone, he typed her name into a search engine. What he found shocked him. Claire Bennett wasn't just any executive. She was one of the wealthiest women in the country, known for revolutionizing sustainable energy technology. Her company, Bennett Energy Solutions, had developed cutting-edge solar panels and wind turbines that were affordable and efficient. Articles praised her as a visionary leader who cared deeply about the environment and improving lives through innovation. Photos showed her shaking hands with world leaders, speaking at conferences and touring sleek laboratories filled with advanced equipment. Ethan stared at the screen, his jaw dropping slightly. He couldn't believe it. The woman he'd picked up during the storm, the same woman whose car he'd helped push out of a ditch, was worth billions. And yet, there hadn't been a trace of arrogance or superiority in her demeanor. She had seemed normal, kind even. Shaking his head in disbelief, Ethan closed the browser and put his phone away. For the rest of the evening, Ethan tried to focus on other things, but Claire kept popping into his mind. He replayed their conversation in the truck, wondering if he'd missed any clues that might have hinted at her wealth. She had mentioned traveling often and managing projects, but nothing specific. Most people talked about their jobs casually without going into detail, and Ethan realized that's exactly what she had done. Still, it was hard not to feel a little awestruck now that he knew the truth. A few days went by, and life returned to its usual rhythm. Ethan worked long hours at the shop, came home to cook simple meals, and spent his evenings watching TV or tinkering with gadgets he found at thrift stores. Just as he started to forget about Claire, his phone rang one evening. The number was unfamiliar, but something nudged him to answer. "Hello?" he said cautiously. "Ethan?" "It's Claire Bennett." Her voice was warm and confident, instantly recognizable. Ethan blinked in surprise, unsure how to respond. "Oh, hi Claire, how are you?" "I'm doing well, thank you," she replied. "I wanted to call and thank you again for your help the other night. You really saved me from a tough situation." "It was no big deal," Ethan said quickly, feeling a bit embarrassed. "Anyone would have done the same." "Well, I appreciate it all the same," Claire said. There was a pause, and then she added, "Actually, I'd like to do something to show my gratitude. Would you be open to visiting me in New York City? I'd love to meet up and personally thank you." Ethan froze. New York City? That was hours away, and he couldn't remember the last time he'd left his small town. The idea of traveling to such a bustling metropolis felt overwhelming, especially since he didn't own anything fancy to wear. But before he could protest, Claire continued, "Of course, I'll cover all the expenses, flights, hotel, everything. Think of it as a small gesture of thanks." Ethan stammered, caught off guard. He didn't want to seem ungrateful, but the offer felt too generous. Finally, he managed to say, "That's very kind of you, but you don't have to go through all that trouble." "It's no trouble at all," Claire insisted. "Besides, I think you'll enjoy seeing the city, and I'd like to hear more about your work at the repair shop. Maybe we can brainstorm some ideas together." "Brainstorm ideas?" Ethan wasn't sure what she meant by that, but her enthusiasm was infectious. Slowly he nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Okay, sure. If you're sure it's not too much hassle, I'd be happy to come." "Great," Claire said, sounding genuinely pleased. "I'll have my assistant send you the details. Just let me know when you're available and we'll make it happen." They ended the call shortly after, and Ethan sat staring at his phone for a long time. Visiting New York City? Meeting one of the richest women in the country? It all felt surreal, like something out of a movie. He wondered what Claire expected from him. Was she just being polite, or did she genuinely want to spend time with someone she barely knew? Over the next few days, Ethan received an email from Claire's assistant with flight tickets and hotel reservations. Everything was arranged perfectly, right down to the shuttle service that would take him from the airport to his hotel. Despite his initial nerves, Ethan began to feel a spark of excitement. He'd never been anywhere exciting before, and the thought of exploring a new place, even briefly, was thrilling. On the day of his trip, Ethan packed a small bag with clothes he hoped looked presentable enough. He wore his best pair of jeans and a neatly ironed button-up shirt, feeling awkward but determined to make a good impression. At the airport, he checked in nervously, clutching his boarding pass tightly. The flight attendants greeted him warmly, and soon he was seated on the plane, staring out the window as they took off. As the miles passed beneath him, Ethan's mind raced with questions. What would New York City be like? Would Claire treat him differently now that they were meeting in her element? And most importantly, why had she gone to such lengths to invite him? Whatever the answers were, Ethan knew one thing for certain. This trip was bound to change his perspective and maybe even his life, in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The moment Ethan stepped off the plane in New York City, he was hit by a rush of noise and energy. The airport buzzed with activity, people rushing past him, announcements blaring over loudspeakers, and the faint hum of engines in the distance. It was nothing like his quiet hometown, where the loudest sound was usually the wind rustling through trees or an occasional car driving by. He adjusted the strap of his bag on his shoulder and took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. A young woman holding a sign with his name on it stood near the baggage claim area. She smiled warmly as Ethan approached. "Hi, are you Ethan Carter?" she asked. "Yes, that's me," Ethan replied, feeling a little out of place in his simple outfit among the sea of people dressed in suits and designer coats. "I'm Lisa, Ms. Bennett's assistant," the woman said, extending her hand. "Welcome to New York. Let me take you to your hotel." Ethan followed Lisa outside where a sleek black car waited for them. The driver opened the door and Ethan slid into the back seat, feeling both grateful and overwhelmed. As they drove through the city, he pressed his face against the window, taking in the towering skyscrapers, busy streets, and endless streams of yellow taxis. Everything seemed larger than life, almost too big to comprehend. When they arrived at the hotel, Ethan couldn't help but gawk. It was one of those places he'd only seen in movies, luxurious and polished, with marble floors and chandeliers hanging from high ceilings. The staff greeted him politely, and within minutes he was handed a key card to his room. Lisa assured him that Claire would meet him the next morning and gave him a schedule for the day. Before leaving, she reminded him to relax and enjoy his stay. That night, Ethan lay awake in his plush bed, staring at the ceiling. The room was nicer than any place he'd ever stayed in, but it didn't feel real. His mind kept replaying the events of the past week: the storm, meeting Claire, discovering who she really was, and now this trip to New York. He wondered if he was dreaming. The next morning, Ethan woke up early and dressed carefully. He chose his cleanest pair of jeans and the same button-up shirt he'd worn on the flight, hoping it still looked decent. After grabbing a quick breakfast in the hotel lobby, he met Lisa in the entrance. Together, they headed to Claire's office building, which turned out to be even more impressive than Ethan had imagined. The glass tower soared above the surrounding buildings, its surface gleaming in the sunlight. Inside, the lobby was sleek and modern, with futuristic sculptures and walls lined with screens displaying information about sustainable energy projects. A security guard checked Ethan's ID before letting him proceed to the elevator. When the doors opened on the top floor, Claire herself was waiting for him. "Ethan," she said, smiling brightly. She looked different today, not because of her appearance, but because she radiated confidence and authority. Gone was the stranded traveler he'd met during the snowstorm. In her place stood a powerful woman who commanded respect. Still, there was kindness in her eyes, the same warmth he remembered. "It's good to see you again," Ethan said, shaking her hand. "Thanks for inviting me here." "It's my pleasure," Claire replied. "Come on, let me show you around." She led him through the office, pointing out various departments and explaining how her company operated. Ethan listened intently, amazed by the scale of what she had built. Engineers worked on advanced prototypes, designers created models for new products, and analysts studied data to improve efficiency. Everywhere he looked, people were focused and driven, united by a shared goal of making the world a better place. Claire paused in front of a large window overlooking the city. "This is why I wanted you to come," she said, turning to face him. "I wanted to thank you properly, not just for helping me during the storm, but for reminding me of something important." Ethan frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "You helped me without expecting anything in return," Claire explained. "You didn't know who I was, and yet you stopped to assist me. That kind of selflessness is rare these days. It made me think about the impact small acts of kindness can have, not just on individuals, but on communities." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "I was just doing what anyone would have done." "No," Claire said firmly. "Not everyone would have done that. And that's why I want to give back. To you, specifically." Before Ethan could respond, she gestured toward a conference room nearby. "Let's sit down and talk more. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Inside the conference room, Ethan sank into a chair while Claire sat across from him. She leaned forward slightly, her expression serious but encouraging. "During our drive together, you mentioned wanting to start a community workshop, a place where kids could learn practical skills like woodworking and mechanics. Do you remember that? Ethan nodded slowly. He had mentioned it casually, almost jokingly, during their conversation. At the time, he hadn't thought much of it. It was just a dream he'd had since he was younger, one he never believed would come true. Yeah, I remember saying that. But it's not really a plan or anything. Just an idea. Well, Claire said, her smile widening, what if we turned it into a reality? What if I funded the project and helped you bring your vision to life? Ethan stared at her, stunned. For a moment, he thought he must have misunderstood. Wait. What? I'm serious, Claire said. Your idea has potential. Teaching kids practical skills gives them confidence and opens doors they might not otherwise have access to. Plus, it strengthens the community. If you're willing, I'd like to support you in making this happen. Ethan shook his head, struggling to process what she was offering. But why me? I'm nobody special. You don't even know me. That's exactly why, Claire said. You're genuine, hardworking, and passionate. Those qualities matter far more than fame or fortune. Besides, sometimes the best ideas come from ordinary people, people who understand the needs of their communities firsthand. For a long time, Ethan didn't say anything. His mind raced with doubts and questions. Could he really pull this off? Did he deserve such an opportunity? But beneath all the uncertainty, there was also excitement. A spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference. Finally, he looked up at Claire. If you're sure about this, then yes, I'll do it. Claire's face lit up with satisfaction. Good. We'll start planning right away. My team will work closely with you to get everything set up. Don't worry, we'll handle the logistics. All you need to focus on is bringing your vision to life. As they left the conference room, Ethan felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him. He was nervous, excited, and grateful all at once. This wasn't something he'd ever expected when he stopped to help a stranger during a snowstorm. Yet here, he was standing in the middle of New York City, being offered the chance to change lives, including his own. On the way back to the hotel, Ethan gazed out the car window again, but this time, the city looked different. It no longer felt overwhelming or intimidating. Instead, it seemed full of possibilities. Maybe Claire was right. Maybe small acts of kindness really could lead to something bigger. Whatever happened next, Ethan knew one thing for certain. His life would never be the same again. Ethan returned home from New York City with his mind racing. The trip had been overwhelming, exciting, and surreal all at once. He couldn't stop thinking about Claire's offer, her willingness to fund his dream of starting a community workshop. It felt like something out of a storybook, the kind of thing that happened to other people, not him. Yet here he was, carrying her business card in his pocket and a notebook filled with ideas they'd brainstormed together. At first, Ethan struggled to believe it was real. Every morning, as he got ready for work at the repair shop, he half expected to wake up and find it had all been a dream. But then Lisa, Claire's assistant, would call or email with updates, questions about the workshop's location, suggestions for equipment suppliers, or reminders about meetings with architects. Slowly, the reality began to sink in. This wasn't just an idea anymore, it was becoming a plan. Claire had promised to send experts to help Ethan every step of the way. True to her word, within days of his return, a team of professionals arrived in town. They included architects, engineers, and designers who specialized in creating functional spaces for communities. Ethan met them at the proposed site, an old abandoned warehouse on the edge of town that Claire had purchased for the project. The building was run down and covered in graffiti, but Ethan could already picture what it might become. The architect, a friendly man named Greg, walked Ethan through the plans. We'll renovate the interior to include classrooms, tool storage areas, and open spaces for hands-on projects, Greg explained, pointing to blueprints spread across a folding table. There will also be a small office for you and a lounge area where students can relax. Ethan nodded, trying to absorb everything. He'd never imagined having a role in something so ambitious. How long will it take? He asked. About 6 months, Greg replied. Once we get started, things should move quickly. We'll keep you updated on the progress. As the weeks went by, Ethan found himself spending less time at the repair shop and more time working on the workshop project. Claire encouraged him to take the lead, trusting his instincts when it came to decisions about layout, tools, and programming. At first, Ethan doubted his ability to make such important choices. After all, he was just a mechanic, not a businessman or educator, but Claire reassured him repeatedly. "You know this community better than anyone," she told him during one of their regular check-ins over the phone. "Trust yourself. You're doing great." With Claire's support, Ethan began reaching out to local schools and organizations to spread the word about the workshop. He visited classrooms, talked to teachers, and attended community meetings to explain his vision. Some people were skeptical at first. They wondered if the project would actually happen or if it was too good to be true. Others were excited, eager to enroll their children or volunteer their time. Ethan listened carefully to everyone's feedback, using it to refine his plans. One afternoon, while supervising construction at the warehouse, Ethan ran into Mr. Dawson, the retired carpenter who lived down the street. Mr. Dawson had owned a small woodworking shop before retiring, and Ethan had always admired his craftsmanship. Seeing him standing near the site, Ethan waved and walked over. "Mr. Dawson," Ethan said, smiling. "What brings you here?" "I heard about your project," Mr. Dawson replied, gesturing toward the building. "Thought I'd come see what's going on. Looks like you've got quite the operation brewing." Ethan chuckled nervously. "Yeah, it's coming along. Still a lot of work to do, though." "Well, count me in if you need any help," Mr. Dawson offered. "I've got years of experience teaching kids how to build things. Maybe I can lend a hand once you're up and running." Ethan's eyes widened in surprise. "Really? That would be amazing. Thank you." Word of the workshop continued to spread, drawing interest from unexpected places. A local hardware store donated tools and materials. A group of high school students volunteered to paint murals on the walls. Even the mayor stopped by one day to congratulate Ethan on bringing something positive to the town. Each gesture of support boosted Ethan's confidence, reminding him that he wasn't alone in this endeavor. Despite the growing excitement, Ethan still faced moments of doubt. Running a community workshop was a huge responsibility, and he worried about letting people down. What if no one showed up? What if the program failed? These thoughts kept him awake some nights, staring at the ceiling and second-guessing himself. But whenever he called Claire to share his concerns, she reminded him why he was doing this. "It's not about being perfect," she told him during one late-night conversation. "It's about giving people a chance to learn, grow, and connect. If you stay true to that mission, you'll succeed." Her words stuck with Ethan, grounding him when the pressure threatened to overwhelm him. He threw himself into the project, determined to prove that Claire's faith in him wasn't misplaced. By the 4th month of construction, the warehouse was nearly unrecognizable. The exterior had been repainted a bright shade of blue, and new windows let sunlight stream into the freshly renovated interior. Inside, rows of workbenches lined the walls, stocked with tools and supplies. Posters explaining basic safety rules hung alongside inspirational quotes about creativity and perseverance. In one corner, a stack of lumber waited to be turned into furniture, birdhouses, or whatever else the students dreamed up. Ethan spent hours exploring the space, imagining the laughter and chatter that would soon fill it. He pictured teenagers learning to weld, children building toy cars, and adults picking up skills they'd always wanted to try. The workshop wasn't just a building, it was a place where dreams could take shape. Finally, after months of hard work, the grand opening arrived. Ethan stood outside the warehouse early that morning, watching as volunteers set up tables and chairs for the celebration. Balloons bobbed in the breeze, and a banner stretched across the entrance read, "Welcome to Carter's Community Workshop." His heart swelled with pride and gratitude. When the doors opened, a steady stream of visitors poured in. Families toured the facility, marveling at the transformation. Kids raced around, testing out tools under the watchful eyes of instructors. Local reporters snapped photos and interviewed Ethan about how the workshop came to be. Throughout the day, Ethan shook countless hands, thanked dozens of supporters, and answered questions about future programs. As the sun began to set, Ethan stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. Standing there, surrounded by the hum of activity, he realized how far he'd come since that snowy night when he'd stopped to help a stranger. Claire had given him an incredible opportunity, but it was the community that had made the workshop a reality. Together they had created something meaningful, something that would change lives for years to come. That evening, as Ethan locked up the workshop and headed home, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. For the first time in a long time, he believed in himself, not because of wealth or fame, but because of the impact he was making. And though he knew challenges lay ahead, he also knew he wouldn't face them alone. With Claire's guidance, the community's support, and his own determination, anything seemed possible. Little did Ethan realize, however, that the journey was far from over. The workshop was just the beginning of a much larger story, one that would test his resolve, deepen his connections, and reveal even greater opportunities waiting just around the corner. Months passed, and Carter's community workshop became a cornerstone of the town. Every day the building buzzed with activity. Kids laughed as they hammered nails into wooden planks, teenagers huddled together to design gadgets, and adults learned skills they'd always wanted to master, but never had the chance. Ethan spent his days moving between classrooms, offering guidance, answering questions, and encouraging everyone who walked through the door. The workshop wasn't just a place, it was a spark that lit up the entire community. At first, Ethan worried about whether people would stick around. He knew it was one thing to show up for the grand opening, but another to keep coming back week after week. To his relief, attendance stayed strong. Parents enrolled their children in classes, local businesses donated materials, and volunteers stepped forward to teach everything from carpentry to basic electronics. Even Mr. Dawson, the retired carpenter, became a regular fixture, sharing his expertise with eager learners. Ethan worked tirelessly to make sure the workshop ran smoothly. He woke up early each morning, checked supply lists, coordinated schedules, and made sure the equipment was in good condition. By evening, he was often exhausted, but the sense of purpose he felt kept him going. Watching students grow more confident with every project they completed reminded him why this mattered so much, not just for them, but for the town as a whole. One afternoon, Ethan found himself sitting at his desk in the small office tucked away in the corner of the workshop. Papers were scattered across the surface, budget reports, class schedules, thank you notes from parents, but his mind kept drifting to Claire. She had called regularly during the early stages of the project, checking in to see how things were progressing, but lately her calls had become less frequent. Ethan understood she was busy running her company, but he missed hearing her voice. Her encouragement had been a steady anchor for him, especially when doubts crept in. Just as he was thinking about her, his phone buzzed on the desk. It was Lisa, Claire's assistant. "Hi, Ethan," she said cheerfully. "Ms. Bennett would like to visit the workshop next week. She wants to see how everything's going." Ethan sat up straight, suddenly alert. "Really? That's great. When is she coming?" "She'll be there on Friday afternoon," Lisa replied. "She's looking forward to meeting some of the students and seeing the space in action." The news filled Ethan with a mix of excitement and nerves. He hadn't seen Claire since his trip to New York City, and the thought of showing her what he'd built was both thrilling and intimidating. Over the next few days, he prepared carefully, making sure the workshop was spotless and organizing a schedule so she could meet some of the key participants. When Friday finally arrived, Ethan paced nervously outside the workshop, waiting for Claire's car to pull into the parking lot. When it did, his heart skipped a beat. She stepped out wearing a tailored coat and boots, her presence commanding yet warm. As she approached, Ethan extended his hand, though she pulled him into a quick hug instead. "It's wonderful to see you again," Claire said, smiling. "This place looks incredible." "Thanks," Ethan replied, feeling a flush of pride. "Come on, I'll give you the tour." He led her through the workshop, pointing out different areas and explaining how they were used. Claire listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and complimenting the thoughtful design. Along the way, Ethan introduced her to several students, including a shy boy named Liam, who had built his first birdhouse, and a teenage girl named Mia, who was working on a solar-powered lantern. Claire knelt down beside Liam, examining his birdhouse with genuine interest. "This is amazing work," she told him. "You should be proud of yourself." Liam beamed, clutching the wooden structure tightly. "Thanks. Mr. Carter taught me how to use the saw and sandpaper." Claire glanced up at Ethan, her expression softening. "It seems like you're doing exactly what we hoped for, giving people the tools to create something meaningful." Later, as they walked through the workshop together, Ethan couldn't help but notice how natural Claire seemed among the students. Despite her wealth and status, she didn't carry herself like someone above them. Instead, she spoke to each person as an equal, listening to their stories and offering encouragement. It was clear she cared deeply about the impact of the project. After the tour, Ethan and Claire sat down in his office to talk privately. She leaned back in her chair, surveying the stacks of papers and blueprints covering his desk. "You've done an incredible job here, Ethan," she said. "I'm so proud of what you've accomplished." "I couldn't have done it without your support," Ethan replied honestly, "or without the community stepping up. This wouldn't exist if it weren't for all of you." Claire nodded, acknowledging his point. Then, after a moment of silence, she added, "But it's not just about this workshop anymore. You've inspired me to think bigger." Ethan frowned, unsure what she meant. "Bigger?" "Yes," Claire said, leaning forward. "What if we took this model and expanded it? What if we created similar workshops in other towns, places where kids don't have access to these kinds of opportunities? We could train instructors, share resources, and build a network of spaces dedicated to teaching practical skills." The idea stunned Ethan. He'd never considered taking the project beyond his own town. The thought of replicating the workshop elsewhere felt overwhelming, almost impossible. "That sounds amazing," he admitted slowly, "but also really complicated. Would people even want that?" "They already do," Claire said confidently. "Trust me, I've seen the data. Communities everywhere are hungry for programs like this. And you're the perfect person to lead the effort." Ethan shook his head, still hesitant. "I don't know if I'm ready for something that big. I'm barely keeping up with this place as it is." "You won't be alone," Claire assured him. "We'll bring in experts to help manage the expansion. All you need to do is stay true to your vision and guide the process. You've already proven you can handle more than you think." Her words lingered in Ethan's mind long after their conversation ended. That night, as he drove home, he replayed their discussion over and over. Could he really take on something this ambitious? The idea excited him, but it also scared him. What if he failed? What if the expanded workshops didn't work as well as this one? Despite his doubts, Ethan couldn't ignore the potential. If he succeeded, he could bring opportunities to countless communities, places where kids might otherwise fall through the cracks. The thought of making such a difference was too compelling to dismiss. Over the following weeks, Ethan threw himself into planning the expansion. Claire sent teams of consultants to help him develop strategies for scaling the program. They analyzed budgets, identified potential locations, and designed training modules for future instructors. At the same time, Ethan continued managing the original workshop, ensuring it remained a thriving hub of creativity and learning. The workload was intense, and there were moments when Ethan felt stretched thin. Some nights he stayed late at the workshop, staring at spreadsheets until his eyes blurred. Other times he doubted whether he was cut out for leadership on this scale. But whenever he faltered, Claire's voice echoed in his mind, "Stay true to your vision." As the months went by, progress began to take shape. The first new workshop opened in a neighboring town, followed by another in a city 2 states away. Each location mirrored the original, with its own unique twist based on the needs of the community. Word spread quickly, drawing attention from educators, policymakers, and media outlets. Stories about the workshops appeared in newspapers and online articles, highlighting the transformative power of hands-on learning. Through it all, Ethan remained grounded. He visited each new site personally, meeting students, instructors, and volunteers. He listened to their feedback, adjusted plans as needed, and celebrated every milestone along the way. With Claire's backing and the community's support, he realized he was capable of far more than he'd ever imagined. By the end of the year, the network of workshops had grown to include 10 locations across 3 states. Thousands of students had participated in classes, and countless lives had been changed. For Ethan, the journey was proof that kindness and determination could ripple outward, touching people in ways he'd never dreamed possible. Still, he knew this was only the beginning. There were always more towns to reach, more skills to teach, and more dreams to nurture. As he stood inside the bustling workshop one evening, watching a group of teenagers assemble a wind turbine they'd designed themselves, Ethan felt a deep sense of gratitude for Claire, for the community, and for the stranger he'd helped during a snowstorm all those months ago. Little did he know, the story was far from over. Challenges lay ahead, testing his resolve and pushing him to grow even further. But no matter what came next, Ethan was ready. He had discovered a truth that would stay with him forever. The greatest gifts often come wrapped in unexpected moments, and sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change the world. Years had passed since Ethan Carter first met Claire Bennett during that life-changing snowstorm. The workshop network he'd built with her support had grown beyond anything he could have imagined. What started as a single community space in a small town had blossomed into a nationwide movement, with workshops in dozens of cities and towns. Thousands of people, young and old, had learned new skills, gained confidence, and found purpose through the program. For Ethan, it was more than just a job. It was his life's work. One crisp autumn afternoon, Ethan stood outside the original workshop, watching as students filed in for their classes. The building looked much the same as it had on opening day, though wear and tear from years of use added character to its walls. Inside, laughter and chatter filled the air, punctuated by the sound of hammers hitting nails and saws cutting wood. It was a comforting noise, one that reminded Ethan of how far they'd come. As he leaned against the railing, lost in thought, a familiar car pulled into the parking lot. Ethan straightened up, surprised to see Claire stepping out. She hadn't visited in over a year, her busy schedule keeping her away. But today she looked different. Not older exactly, but softer somehow. Her sharp suit was replaced by a cozy sweater and jeans, and her hair fell loose around her shoulders. She smiled warmly as she approached him. "Ethan," she said, extending her hand. "It's been too long." "It has," Ethan agreed, shaking her hand firmly. "What brings you here?" "I wanted to see how things are going," Claire replied, "and maybe take a walk down memory lane." Ethan grinned. "Well, you picked the right place. Come on, I'll show you around." He led her inside, guiding her through the bustling workshop. Students greeted him cheerfully, calling him Mr. Carter or simply Ethan. Claire watched quietly, taking in the energy of the room. She stopped to admire a display of projects created by past participants. A wooden bench, a hand-carved chess set, a miniature robot powered by solar panels. Each piece told a story of effort, creativity, and growth. "This is incredible," Claire said softly. "You've done so much more than I ever expected." "It wasn't just me," Ethan replied. "The community made this happen. And you gave us the chance to start." Claire shook her head. "No, Ethan. You're the heart of this project. Without your vision and dedication, none of this would exist." Her words struck a chord deep within him. Over the years, Ethan had often wondered if he truly deserved the credit people gave him. He knew he'd worked hard, but he also knew he couldn't have done it alone. Still, hearing Claire acknowledge his role meant more than he could say. After the tour, they sat together in the lounge area, sipping coffee and reminiscing about the early days of the workshop. Claire asked about specific students Ethan had mentioned in updates. Liam, who now built furniture professionally, and Mia, whose solar-powered lantern had won a science fair award. Ethan shared stories of others too, A single mother who learned carpentry and started her own business, a retired mechanic who found joy teaching teenagers, and countless kids who discovered talents they never knew they had. "You've changed so many lives," Claire said, her voice tinged with admiration. "Including your own." Ethan nodded slowly. "I used to think success was about money or fame, but now I know it's about connection, helping people find their potential and seeing the ripple effect of that." Claire smiled. "That's why I believe in what you're doing. It's not just about teaching skills. It's about empowering people to shape their futures." Their conversation turned to the future of the workshop network. Claire explained that she planned to step back from her company soon, focusing instead on philanthropy and mentoring young leaders. "I want to dedicate more time to projects like this," she said. "Projects that create lasting change." Ethan felt a surge of gratitude. Claire's generosity had transformed his life, and now she was preparing to do even more good in the world. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Claire reached across the table, placing a hand on his. "Thank you, Ethan. You remind me why I started my company in the first place, to make a difference. And you've shown me that the smallest acts of kindness can lead to something extraordinary." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light through the windows, Ethan realized how much his perspective had shifted over the years. Once a man struggling to get by, he now stood at the center of a movement that inspired hope and possibility. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been challenges, doubts, and moments when he questioned whether he was capable of leading such an ambitious project. But through it all, he'd stayed true to his vision, guided by the belief that everyone deserved a chance to learn, grow, and thrive. Later that evening, after Claire had left, Ethan walked through the empty workshop. The hum of activity had faded, leaving behind a quiet stillness. He paused in front of a bulletin board covered in photos of students and their creations. One picture caught his eye, a group of children standing proudly beside a treehouse they'd built together. Their smiles were wide, their eyes bright with accomplishment. In that moment, Ethan understood something profound. True wealth wasn't measured in dollars or possessions. It was found in the connections we forge and the impact we leave behind. His simple act of kindness during a snowstorm had set everything in motion, creating a chain reaction of positivity that continued to grow. And while he might never fully grasp the extent of his influence, he knew one thing for certain. The world was better because he'd chosen to help a stranger. As he locked up the workshop and headed home, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace. Life had taken him places he'd never dreamed of, introducing him to people who had changed him forever. Claire, the students, the volunteers, they had all become part of his story, woven together by shared goals and mutual respect. Together, they had built something greater than any one person could achieve alone. The road ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges, but Ethan faced them with confidence. He had learned that kindness, determination, and collaboration could overcome almost any obstacle. And as long as there were people willing to lend a hand, share an idea, or dream big, the possibilities were endless. That night, as Ethan lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he thought about the future. There were always more workshops to open, more communities to reach, and more lives to touch. But for now, he allowed himself to rest, knowing he had already accomplished more than he'd ever hoped. Somewhere out there, another snowstorm might be brewing, bringing strangers together in ways neither could predict. And perhaps somewhere along the way, another act of kindness would spark a journey just as remarkable as his own. Ethan closed his eyes, smiling faintly. Whatever tomorrow held, he was ready.